everyone. Welcome to Motherless Daughter, episode 2. This week's episode, I thought we could get into talking about the different moments where you actually went to prison. I feel like in terms of me, the one that really affected me the most was when I was 12. But there was a time where you went to prison when I was probably about 5. And then again when I was maybe about 9 or 10. And so I think we should maybe just dig a little bit deeper or talk about what those moments look like and what led up to that. And then just give our different perspectives on how they were handled. I know a few memories come to my mind when I think about those moments. So why don't you share the first time you went to prison when I was born?
I was going to say, okay.
Or you can share if you want.
Well, the first time I ever went to a prison or jail environment, I was 14 actually. Mm-hmm. And my mother took me to court, and I got put into Landmark Juvenile Detention Center, and I was there for about a month. And then my mother came and got me out and took me home, and then she left and went to Greece for 2 weeks and left me there with my older brother. So that first experience for me was very interesting emotionally. And then I think that's when I started realizing that I wasn't going to have a family at that point. So things went as they went, and then the next couple of months after that, I ended up a ward of the court. And so the court system actually came into my life when I was 13, and went into residential, went to group homes, went to foster care, ended up at 18 leaving foster care, and that is when my life took a turn of homelessness, sleeping on the streets, just trying to survive as best as I knew how. And then I met your brother's father. And the first time that I got in legal trouble after the legal age was I was working at a grocery store and we didn't have any groceries. And so I took them and I got caught. So that was the first time that I got into legal trouble as an adult. And then there were different times after that that I got slapped on the wrist. I feel today, I look at intellectually, they saw a person. Intellectually, they saw a person that was smart enough, was able to articulate, and I carried myself in a certain manner. So I think they thought I had it all together, and at some point I would know right from wrong.
Yeah, I think you often do see that and typically in any situation, if you make a mistake or you do something wrong, if you can show remorse or you can maneuver through that situation showing yourself as a professional, that you won't do it again, that you've learned from that, which typically people who are committing white-collar crimes are smart enough to be able to articulate that. I think it looks different for you in the criminal justice system.
It does. It definitely does. So I was slapped numerous times. As we know, today I have 19 felonies to my name, and that I was part of the justice system for 39 years. So this is a long-term issue in my life. However, slaps on the wrists, and then I was working in DC and I got a federal crime, and that was the first time that I got removed from my family. And at that time, unfortunately, it was a rescue at that time.
How old was I? Was I born yet?
You were born, Claire was born. You were 4 and Claire was 2. And that was when I was working at the church, and I was supposed to come get you guys, and they locked me up then. And that's when you lived with your dad. and then you went to
On Sharon's.
right on
Okay.
Sharon's. They came and got you from the church.
Yeah.
And then
I have these weird memories that they came and got us from school.
Right.
I just thought it was Court Kelly for some reason.
No,
but
it was the church.
But no, did like Child Protective Services
Yes,
come and get
they
us?
came and got you. So you and Claire were in Child Protective Services. I was in DC jail. And at that point, they removed you because your father was a drug addict and alcoholic, and he was abusive to me. So for me to be removed from that, I was being removed because of my own choices, but it was also a sense of relief.
Yeah, especially when
Because-
you're getting abused.
Right, and so you and Claire don't remember any of that, but all the other siblings remember those times.
Yeah.
And so that time that I went, I ended up in Alderson, West Virginia for 18 months. You were in Child Protective Services for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and Sharon immediately came and got you guys.
Yeah, I always talk about that time, like that's when Claire and I first entered care. I remember the two situations where we were living with one family. I remember them having a pool across the street from their house and them taking us to the pool every day. And then I remember us being with another family where I talk about how she reprimanded me for helping Claire in the bathroom. So those are pretty much like the two memories that I have. And then of course, moving and living with Aunt Sharon.
And that was a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah.
But this is again where it takes a village that has come into our lives, that we have had some very special, caring people
Yeah.
that have stepped in when your father and I couldn't.
Yeah. How did you guys know Aunt Sharon? Like, where did she come
So
from?
your father knew Aunt Sharon, and then we ended up moving 4 houses down from her.
Right.
And so that's how I got to know her.
Okay.
And then when you were born, your father had already asked her if she would be your godparent.
Oh, okay.
And then my thought was, well, it should be Ringo as your godfather because those are your brothers. It would keep
The family
the
together.
family together. But little do we know on the future.
Yeah. I was thinking we could break down the dynamics of our family. It can get very complicated as
Yes.
time goes on, so we'll have to do that.
And show pictures or something. So that was the first time I was removed. And I went to Alderson for 18 months. And for me, it was the first time I wasn't a mom. I wasn't a drug addict. I wasn't a daughter that was in the system. It was the first time I remember going, oh, I'm a person. Because I didn't, and we've talked about this. I didn't grow up with a family that loved me, so I said, oh, I want to be a mom. I would never give up my journey because I love you all tremendously. But, some people grow up wanting to be a mom and wanting to be married, and I was like, no,
Yeah.
because I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So I feel like when I got there, it was the first time I could breathe as me. It was a very sad time because I still didn't understand my own life. It was a beautiful environment. It was up in the mountains. The visitation there, Sharon brought you guys, and you would come and we would make things in the children's center. I would send you guys stuff and we would talk on the phone, and so there was always a connection there. And then I came home, and when I came home, your father and I did not get back together. And I ended up living with your old babysitter, Miss Johnson.
Oh, right.
Richardson.
Yeah, I
And I
remember
lived-
living in the attic.
Living in the attic at Miss Richardson's. And then I got into a program that helped me get my own place.
So how long were we actually with Aunt Sharon?
About 2.5 years. Because when you finally came with us, you were starting kindergarten.
Oh, okay, so 5.
Right. So
And
it's like 3 to 5.
And that was you living where?
At Glendale, across
I was
from.
5?
Mhm.
So y'all lived there about 3 years?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
So, and then at that point, me being the codependent person that I was, got into another relationship. Once I came home and I got the apartment, I ended up with my codependent behavior in another relationship. And at that point in that relationship, I saw him as he rescued me because,
Or you thought?
I thought, correct. He was the provider of drugs to your father, and your father saw him as this good friend. I saw him as your father's drug dealer, and when he would come to give your father drugs, there had been episodes happening where your father had been beating me, and he would come in and literally remove William. There was an incident where your father busted my eye, and you were a baby, and I had dropped him off at work, and he punched me in the face, and I was bleeding, and I couldn't drive back home. And he came and he took us. There was a time where
Who took you?
Saul
Oh, okay.
took us from the situation.
Oh, okay.
And so then there was a time where I gave your father the money to pay the electricity, and the electricity got cut off. And he came and took us to his apartment. Me, you, the boys, everybody. So there were different times in my life where I felt like I didn't see him the way everybody else saw him.
Yeah, because I mean, of course, when you're young, you don't really
know.
realize what's going on, and so I think, you know, for those that are listening, it's so interesting and revealing to understand why things are the way they are, or how things got to be where they are, because I always grew up knowing that Saul was my dad's best friend and that you married my dad's best friend, which of course is a weird dynamic. You would think that, like, why is, you know, it's just like when you see on movies, or I've been watching For Life lately, and the lady is dating the man's best friend, and it was kind of like that dynamic. And so that can be weird as a child, thinking that, you know, maybe you were the bad guy in the situation versus my dad's. And not to discredit them, but I also, as you're explaining this, I just think about, you know, as a baby, I may not remember all of those things that are going on for what they were at that time, and it may not be at the forefront of my mind, but it's just very interesting because I know it's affected me in some kind of way. The fact that I was in that environment, that I was witnessing and seeing things, and my brain was still developing and growing, and to be in an environment that way, it's had some impact on who I am and how I operate as an individual. And that goes for anybody in the world, like no matter what you go through, depending on how you were raised, how you were brought up, the different experiences that you've experienced, they make you who you are today. And if it's dysfunction and it's traumatic, and you're at such a young age and you don't really remember, it's interesting to hear these things, because then you can start to put the puzzles of the pieces together and say, oh, this is why I do this, or this is why I feel this way, because I was experiencing things in my life that I do not remember at this point now.
So Saul and I ended up getting married.
So I have a question. Did you see any difference, like once he finally rescued you, or you felt rescued from the situation? Because I remember you and Saul like arguing as well.
Right.
I don't know if he was ever really physically abusive.
He was never physically. So when I came home in 1998, Saul was locked up.
Okay, so you went to jail.
I went to feds, yeah.
You went to the feds while Claire and I went to foster care, went to Aunt Sharon's. You came back. You lived with Miss Richardson. You got the apartment. Was that you and Saul's apartment?
No,
it was your apartment. And Saul was locked up at the time.
Saul was locked up. No, when I got the apartment, he lived in Winchester. We used to travel back and forth. But when I first got home and I was living at Miss Richardson's, Saul was in Buckingham.
Okay.
And so he got released to Winchester, and he stayed in Winchester, and we would drive back and forth to Winchester.
Right.
And then I got the apartment in Del Rey on Glendale, and next thing I know, he was there. And
So then he moved in
he moved
to
in
Glendale,
into Glendale.
and then we were living there for about how many years before you got locked up again? Oh no, we moved to the house.
Moved to the house. So we left Glendale
Bought a house.
and bought a house.
Life was booming then, y'all. Y'all had cars. We had a house. I remember it was Christmas, right before Christmas, either like the week of or the week before.
Yeah.
And Christmas was crazy that year.
Yeah, because we had everybody there. Like the whole house was packed. But I also remember like feeding you all, making sure everybody was okay, and then leaving to the basement.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember very dark days.
Yeah.
I remember just the misery I was in.
Mm-hmm.
I remember wanting everybody to be happy and always smiling, and then leaving. That also was the time, that was 2001, because we got married in 2000. So it was the end of 2001, beginning of 2002, and that is when I finally decided drugs and alcohol had to be removed from my life. And that's when that journey started.
And what made you realize that?
Because I was back into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I was in some serious trouble.
And so you felt like the drugs and the alcohol is what led you to getting into trouble again?
That was my belief at the time. That if I removed the drugs and alcohol, maybe I'd get slapped on the wrist again and I wouldn't be removed.
Mm-hmm.
However, it didn't work that way.
Yeah.
They raided our house.
Mm-hmm.
They took everything out of the
I
house.
remember coming home that day.
Everything was taken that day.
Yeah, I remember that. They like ransacked the room. You just told us everything was going to be okay and kind of cleaned it up. And
Yep, and I remember you guys going to school every day and me sitting in a chair in the living room cross-stitching because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I felt a sense of disgrace, but I didn't understand. And then when I would go out the door, I would put on the mask. I was very good at the mask. But I was taught the mask from my mom and dad. I was taught that at a very young age, to be seen and not heard. And even though everything was going on along around me, I still had to look like I was presentable. Mm-hmm. And so that had become a behavior, a learned behavior. Mm-hmm. And March 24th of 2002 is when I stopped using drugs and alcohol in my life. And there were a lot of drugs that you all just didn't even know about.
Yeah.
So that hasn't even happened. And as a family, we haven't ever discussed that, because I think there's certain things in my life I don't want you all to know I went down that route. Mm-hmm. Because for me, there are parts of my life that were despicable. Mm-hmm. But they were choices that I made, and if you didn't sleep next to me, then you wouldn't know I was doing it. Mm-hmm. And that was that secret. So for me, that was a very despairing time. So then that's when I went away to Alexandria jail for the year.
For 18 months, right?
No, I went for a year. I couldn't, 16 months.
So, yeah, I thought it was something around 18 because
right. I got sentenced to 18 and did 16.
Yeah, I remember that time period being very, just like a different dynamic. I felt like you always put Saul before us. I feel like I remember a time, and sometimes with my memories, they seem to be inaccurate, but I felt like there were times where you would like cook a meal for him and tell us it was like fend for yourself night. I remember you having to leave and go to court multiple times and then come back, and then I remember sitting on the step the day I guess you were gone and like asking Saul, were you coming back? And you told me no. And
your dad came.
well, yeah, so we'll get into that story next. I remember you going for 16 to 18 months, and I remember us living with Saul, not for long. As soon as I remember my dad calling and asking what was going on, I'm sure he had heard through the grapevine that you had went to jail, and I remember him going off that we were going to be staying there with Saul. And next thing I know, we ended up going and living with my dad. I'm not sure if he went to court or anything, or if you guys were just like, whatever, take the girls. I think Saul did have power of attorney over us.
So Saul had power of attorney over everything. Your father and Saul got into a hellacious fight. My understanding is none of the kids were around, but I wasn't there. And then the decision was, fine, take them. And at that point, he was married.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So why did you give Saul power of attorney without speaking to my dad or talking to my dad about that? Why did you feel as though you should have made that decision without his input?
So, I will never discredit the fact that your father was in your life, but your father wasn't always an on-time dad. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that Saul was perfect, but Saul was a consistency for me. Mm-hmm. Whether it was healthy, right, wrong, or indifferent, he was the consistency. And in my brain, consistency was important. And I thought, in my sick, demented thinking at the time, that he would still treat you the way I would treat you. Mm-hmm. Not realizing that that just was wrong. Yeah. Not realizing that Saul wasn't who I thought he was. Mm-hmm. And we will talk more on that. Yeah. But, you know, you went to your father's, Bradley and Daniel went to Ringo's. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first time I really remember like being with my dad and like Claire and I actually living under the same roof as him. Obviously, I think a lot of his stability reflected his wife at the time, her providing that for us. But we did face some challenges even then. He was still an alcoholic. We ended up in the shelter during that time as well, Claire and I. So I think for us, it was just a matter of the behind the back that was transpiring, and then my dad trying to step up and do whatever he could potentially do. And then I remember that time flying and us immediately having to move back with you when you moved to Falls Church. And that was very difficult for me, and I didn't want to go because not only had you been in jail all this time, we immediately had to go back. No one asked us what we wanted, and I was up and moving from the city and the space that I had known all my life. So that was difficult for me, but I think, you know, it was just a transition that we had to go through. I'm not sure how Claire felt about it, but I do remember seeing you in church. That's how I seen you for the first time when you got home. We went to church and you were there, and then that same exact week, Takia came and got us, got all of our stuff, and brought us to Falls Church.
And so I think we should move back a few steps, talking about the dynamic of relationships. Mm-hmm. In my mind, anyone that showed me loyalty, because I didn't have that from my parents, I kept close to the breast. And it didn't matter that they didn't treat me right and that they weren't good role models, because I wasn't healthy as a woman, and I didn't ever have a role model of what that meant. Loyalty was the number one thing that would keep you in my circle, my orbit, you know. And in my mind, Saul was that person because of how things transgressed with him. I really believe that he was a man of honor, not realizing that I was just a way and a means to him as well. You know, and so I made the choices that I made because in my thinking, I needed to do whatever I could do to possibly take care of all the people under my roof. And whatever that meant to me, I did. And I did not make the best choices at all. So I would choose to do crimes to take care of what was in my household, and then I would get high to cover up all the disgrace and guilt and despicableness that I felt inside. I knew right from wrong, but I didn't realize the emotional brokenness I was. I was living a life at whatever physical age, but I was still very much a 13-year-old girl emotionally. And so I would go to any means possible to make my family have. And those were, I was never taught not to do that. Because when you end up in the justice system, you get into survival mode. And I'm sure you've experienced some of that in foster care. You become, what do I need to do to survive this situation? How do I develop and get out of this? At what point?
Yeah, and for me, that was always hard to hear. Even in this moment, it's providing more understanding, but it was really hard to hear that you went to jail because you were trying to provide for us. I think all of my siblings kind of have that feeling of you blaming us for your actions, or you blaming us for why things were the way they were, and really what you were just saying was that you did those things because you had to provide, not
at all.
You know,
it was not your all's fault. It was not, I didn't know any other way than what I knew and what I was making as an income, because I went to work every day. You all never not saw me not working. It just was never enough. On top of having a habit, on top of having a partner that was lousy, on top of having 10 children in the house. There were times, and when you said where I would make dinner for Saul and tell you to fend for yourself, I think at that point in my life, I just didn't know how to do anything sometimes. And I'm sorry that that's how you saw it, because that's not how I saw it. But if that's what I did, I apologize.
Well,
because, but I do, because, and I say this to you all often, my choices were my choices, and you all are not to blame for any of it, but it was the only way I knew how to provide for all that I had.
Well, and that's why this is going to get hard, because you are able to speak like this now that you've grown, now that you've gone through these experiences, but back then it wasn't communicated that way. So, we did get blamed at times for your actions, and now that, now it makes sense where you're at now that you've learned and grown what that blame really was deep down inside, but how it was portrayed and how it came off was like, damn, this is our fault that she's in this situation. If we didn't exist, she may not be in the same situation. And of course, us being younger at the time and experiencing those things, everything is just different. The dynamic is different. But, I always tell you, I don't regret, I wouldn't take back my life for anything for the world, because I know that each and every experience made me who I am today, and it was opportunities for us to grow and to learn and to have opportunities like this. If we got it all right, we wouldn't be able to share these things with everyone. So, yeah, it's tough to hear that, we're not the same person we are today back then, but it's the reality.
Well, and you have people, unfortunately, that love us and support us still won't take responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, and so my attitude in this is that I will always take responsibility because my children deserve that. I didn't realize how much people put the blame on you all until we were at a visit in prison, and we'll talk about that. I don't know if you all remember it, but it was at a milk visit, and it was a very tough conversation. And in my brain, I never was blaming you. Mm-hmm. I knew it was always me, but I have to remember people outside of that were taking what I was saying and making it sound as though it was blame.
Yeah. And then so fast forward to us moving back to Guthrie and us moving to Guthrie, you going to prison, us moving to Falls Church. Then after a couple years later, you then went back to prison. So I was talking about how Takia came and got us. We had to go right to Falls Church, and you lived in an apartment. You were in a program, and which that program was like ended up becoming a part of our whole family, which is very weird. But so we ended up going into this program. Claire and I moved in with you. I remember it was a 2-bedroom apartment. Well, really like a 1-bedroom and a den. I remember
it was 2 bedrooms.
Was it 2-bedroom? Mm-hmm. Because I remember
You and Claire had a bedroom, and I had a bedroom, and then there was a den. There was a den. Kitchen.
Okay, so you didn't move back there until later on, maybe. Right. But okay, right. So
I moved back there when Bradley and Daniel came.
Okay, so that's what it was. So Claire and I ended up moving in with you. I think it was like we were in a new school, but I remember you making us breakfast. It was like these croissants with like honey and like cinnamon or something in them. They were really good. I just remember that was like a very like, I don't know, a moment. That was probably the first time you had like cooked for us or something since everything. And we were like living with you in Falls Church. And I know for me, that was a very like pivotal transition in my life just as a young woman. I was growing, I was hitting puberty, I was maturing, I was exploring, I was meeting people. It was a very interesting dynamic in my life, and you just said I was very angry, which is interesting too to think about. I mean,
you yelled at me a lot. So the reason why
people say that about me, apparently I yell a lot.
So that transition, I got into this program, Homestretch, and in order to be in the program, my children had to be living with me. Mm-hmm. In order to have housing, they had to reside. That was why the immediate transition happened. Now, I did speak to your father, and I said, I have an opportunity, and this opportunity is going to allow the family to get back on their feet, and this is what is, and he was supportive. He wanted you all to have the best, and he felt like being with me was the best. And so, yes, we both made that decision, and it was quick, and the minute I moved in, 2 days later, you all were there. Mm-hmm. And then 3 weeks later, Bradley and Daniel were there. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, it was a fresh start. I was going to have my children. Mm-hmm. Life was good. We were having parties, not parties, but I mean, we as a family were, like you said, I was cooking, we were eating. It was emotional. You were very mad at me. You didn't want to be there. And so when you got mad, Claire got mad.
That's hilarious.
And then when Bradley and Daniel came, they were sort of like, I don't like this, but mom's home. And so we're going to make the best of it. And of course, that transition had to do with the Cromedies. So we then have 2 more families that come into our lives, the Cromedies and the Ericksons. Yeah. And so they were trying to make all this happen, the dynamics. And at that time, in my brain, I was getting a second chance. However, I didn't know that I was still a very unhealthy woman. And I ended up getting a job where I told them 100% truth about me, and they were willing to give me a chance. And things went well for about 6 months. And then Saul showed up. And
I remember Daniel, Claire, I mean, it was me, Daniel, and Bradley. We went to a retreat, and I remember coming home, and Saul was there. It was you, Claire, and Saul, and Daniel, and I was looking like, what the hell is going on here?
yeah, he hadn't moved in yet.
No, but he was there.
He was there.
And you were there was a family meeting called,
Yeah,
and you were basically sharing with us that you all were going to be together.
again, yeah.
And I remember there was a couch and a coffee table, and it was like this bookshelf. I don't know if someone made it or gave it to us or whatever, but I remember sitting like next to that bookshelf and just thinking like this is a mess, because I think too we thought that Saul was the reason, or we saw that you were better without him.
Right.
And
I was. I was. And we will talk more about that. I was.
Yeah. So when did you all decide that y'all were going to be together? He wasn't living there, but I remember us moving to the house.
Right. So he wasn't living in the apartment. And I had done everything that I needed to do, and I was now eligible to go to a townhouse. And that was when the decision was made that Saul would move with us. And I remember, financially, I could handle everything. And I remember Saul moving in with us, and not even 2 weeks after he was there, I was stealing again.
Why?
Today, it was, I know that it was the thought of having to please. Because you're right, had Saul not come back in my life, and it's not his fault, it's all me, but had that added pressure come into my life in a relationship, for me to please, yeah, I wouldn't have.
Or at least you don't think you would have.
I don't think I would have. What I have learned through now is that stealing was also my next addiction. It had been so much a part of my life that in my brain I had attached it to using. When really Saul triggered my addiction. And the first thing that I had access to pick up was money. I didn't have access to the drugs and alcohol anymore. So that was my first relapse of the old behavior in me that triggered. And again, it's not his fault. Those are choices I made. And then we got into the townhouse, and we were there about a year. And it was eating me alive, literally.
Yeah.
I couldn't even look at you guys in the face. I would cook dinner and go straight to my room. It got to the point where I couldn't have conversations with you all.
That's okay. Don't make me cry. I'm a little
I
emotional.
know. But that I literally remember those days where I would cook, make sure you guys were all okay, and run to the room.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't face you. But I still didn't know why.
Yeah.
I still didn't understand why, because no one taught me what healthy relationships are. And I didn't know that I was destroying, I was thinking I was destroying me. And if I removed me, you all would still be okay. I didn't know that I was the glue to my children.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you all needed me as much as I needed you. But I just thought if I was in my room, I wouldn't rub off on you. You know, Takia was already going through things. I didn't realize, I just thought, oh my God, if you're not around me, then my behavior won't rub off on you. If you're, and it's funny because we talk about things now, and like if there was anything you all knew as children, you will not get pregnant at a young age, which was number 1 rule. Number 2 rule is you're gonna go to college, which we will somehow address at some point. And number 3 is you will not steal. Like all the things in my life that were huge dynamics, I preached to you all. Like you knew those lines would send me to oblivion and back.
Yeah.
And so there were times I wanted to die. Because I didn't know how I ended up back there.
Yeah.
I had been given this opportunity, and Jen and Jen were our saviors in my eyes. This is sort of where we'll wrap it up and we'll come back at another time. But this one story is, I went to church at In His Glory, and you guys had already gone into the church, and for some reason I couldn't get in there. And so I went to the bathroom because I thought something was wrong, and I started throwing up. Well, I started dry heaving, and like this stuff was coming out of me. And I guess I was in there too long, and Saul came in and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I just looked up at him and I said, "No, I'm stealing again." And it was the first time I had ever admitted to anyone. I waited until they caught me. And once they caught me, I told the truth, but I wasn't going to tell on myself. So that day, Jen and their families were coming over, and we ate, and you guys went out to play, and I sat them down and I said, "I'm embezzling again." And at that moment, they both looked at me and cried. And they said, "We love you. We don't like your choices." And it was the first time anybody had said to me that they loved me. That I was lovable.
Yeah. Regardless of your mistakes.
Right. So.
Well, shout out to Miss Carmody and Miss Erickson. We love you all so much.
We do.
You all have been a vital part of our family. And we just want to thank you all for listening and being patient with us and understanding. We hope that you all take this opportunity to come together with a loved one that you may have had some dysfunction or some difficulties or life challenges with, and figure out what has caused those. Talk about some difficult things that have happened in your past and in your life. Until next time, thank you.